what sort of top of mind things will you carry away from this meeting that you think was important?
I think the idea of coming out of design thinking and trying to apply it to your life, the idea of building a self. I think that's a fascinating idea of building a self, because when we think about self, we think about development, but building is a different kind of metaphor for how to think about how you would proceed in your life. And then I think what really struck me is the graph that you showed about dysfunctional beliefs, and about those who were waitlisted but couldn't get in, and about how they then adopted the kind of dysfunctional beliefs. And I think that's a signpost for the number of students who are trying to think through issues of meaning and purpose, who want to think about building, developing, designing their lives, but need the resources to do so. So I think what was brought to me was the urgency of needing to do this, and for institutional structures to be responsive to it and to provide resources for students to be able to do this.
Great. Greg?
I've read Dave and Bill's book, and my daughter's been through a workshop with Dave, so the content of the material wasn't what was brand new. I think what struck me was Dave's wise cautions about the skepticism and toximeter readings and the kinds of issues at a place like Stanford among undergraduates. And what really struck me was questions about purpose and meaning are all over the place in corporations and in other organizations. The academy, the contemporary academy, may be the place that is most wary of those conversations. And so this is an on-ramp into those conversations. Rick, you posted Julie Rubin's book in your presentation this morning about the ways in which the 20th century watched a decline from those questions being central in the 19th century to the research university and kind of in loco parentis, and we saw the problems with that, and so then we just kind of abdicated all of that and end up with, in universities like the ones I've been part of, most of the meaning questions are only discussed by student life professionals in the midst of crisis. And so there's not the kind of depth. And this designing your life and those kind design thinking is an on-ramp into much more important and deep questions if higher education is to have a meaningful role in student lives in the 21st century.
Terrific, very helpful. Now I'm going to use you guys as consultants to help me with the Network of Networks project with all these other universities. So if I have this kind of a talk with these 15 provosts, and I talk to them about the framing that I mentioned this morning, about literally taking responsibility for trying to shape identity and agency and a sense of purpose, they're going to say, but we have 35,000 students at our campus, we have courses, we can't talk about things that are too personal. How are we going to do this? Are there any things out there, any courses like off the shelf that we could use that get at this, even in a partially in a direction? Okay, so I mean, for example, if you want to get at agency, turns out if you have at least one course that students have to make things and they have to show others what they did at the end, you begin to step down that pathway. That's a scalable thing. There are lots of them off the shelf. If you want to talk about identity, there are a number of courses. Carol Dweck's work is really good. There are scalable things in that area. She's done it in K-12 in large areas. So here's a resource. Go here and find it. I am much less familiar with what's available in the shaping the sense of purpose. And I'm just sort of curious if any of you have some suggestions on where to go to look for things that might be available in that area. Who's doing it well? What kinds of resources are there?
So I'll bring up two examples, which are very different. One's outside the United States and one's inside the United States. So Universidad Tecmilenio, based in Monterrey, but has campuses across Mexico. They serve about 50, 60,000 students. They're kind of a new university created from Tecnológico, which is the most prestigious private university in Mexico. And they have made it their mission to help develop purpose in life in their students. And so they conceive of this as a university-wide endeavor, as something that when you step in, as soon as you come on campus, these are questions that you're thinking about. And even when you graduate, you are asked questions, both in the beginning, during, and after, that creates a culture around thinking about purpose in life. And of course, as to Dave's point, not everyone who walks in that door is going to be interested in engaging it. But the key thing is creating that culture of receptivity and understanding that creating that space can have monumental impacts and effects for a number of different students, both during the collegiate experience as well as for their downstream well-being. So I think that's one example that's happening university-wide. That's really an interesting model to learn from and think about. Now, to go to Greg's point about the secular university and how you would think about doing this. When I was at the John Templeton Foundation, I had a relationship, and we had done grants before with Richard Thaler at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. And his work on Nudge was funded by work that came out of a portfolio I was in. And I'd really pushed his Center for Decision Research to think much more broadly beyond goal-directedness. And so I helped them think through, could you tackle the concept of purpose? Is this something that you could think about in a business environment more widely in terms of using the tools of behavioral economics? And so they developed an initiative called New Paths to Purpose. Now, as part of that initiative, which closed about a year or two ago, they had a research RFP, a number of different projects came out of it. But what they were also doing was developing a pilot course to be piloted at Booth School of Business about helping future MBAs think about developing their purpose in life. So these are things where, oftentimes the topic when you get into issues of morality, it gets into these kind of authoritarian or, be prescriptive. That's, that you can stay away from that. But, the moment is now, and there's a deep interest in trying to explore these issues and questions in a way that successfully navigates the kind of contemporary secular kind of cultures and structures in which we live. And it is possible to do it.
Terrific.
I'd add two notes, one example and then one just a strategy. The example is Wake Forest, where Andy Chan is a senior vice president for career services, and he just flipped the model to say, rather than waiting till your senior year and getting those anxious kids who are now saying, uh-oh, I've done school well, now what the heck am I going to do? They flipped it to start the question around vocation as soon as they arrive on campus, before orientation their freshman year. And they then weave that into various kinds of courses that are one credit or non-credit, but it's not part of the required curriculum, but it's something that has attracted a surprising number of students, because it is like what Dave is doing at Stanford, opening up a conversation that students are actually really hungry for. And if you do it well, and it doesn't feel like the parent's prescriptive kind of in loco parentis model, it's really had a huge impact, and lots of people are going to Wake Forest just to try to figure out that kind of model. Because the career services, traditional career services of your senior year is just an exercise in frustration for everybody. And as the nature of work is changing, the discussion we didn't have this morning, that's going to be even more important, because it's not just about finding a job, it's about designing your life in that sense. The advice that I'd have about even large campuses is that often we get paralyzed by the sense of scale. And that's where the prototyping example, and look for the early adopters and the places where you're going to find the greatest receptivity. Don't start by putting together a working group. I'm a humanities person myself, but if you put together a working group of humanities and social scientists, you're going to get stuck very quickly. But if you go to the professional schools where people are already oriented toward building and making things, you're going to find some pockets of receptivity. When I was provost at Baylor, as you may know, Baylor had a rough year last year around an athletics scandal, and everything was just imploding, and it was a terrible exhibit A of how not to do crisis communications. I could go on and on. But at Christmas time, I was just kind of like, what the heck are we going to do? Faculty are depressed, the students are kind of listless. What are we going to do? And I just thought, we're just going to throw out a scenario. I didn't have any budget for it. That was all going to lawyers and settlements and other things. But I said, we're going to just invite faculty to work together with teams of students on social innovation. That was about all the prescription we had was if you have an idea, submit a proposal and we'll see if we can provide seed funding. I thought if we got like 3 or 4 examples, it would be energizing just for that. We had, within 2 weeks, 30 different teams, including faculty who didn't know each other across wild, disparate disciplines. One project that was one of my favorites had a nursing professor with an information sciences, management information systems professor with an art professor and a historian working together on a mobile app to help mothers in Bangalore, India. And they hadn't even met until all of a sudden now they found, and they designed a course, they designed a summer experience for students, and it was incredible. Struck me as the kind of thing like the story you read, Rick, earlier from the testimonies. People are hungry for these kinds of questions, and if you just create the kind of skunk works without trying to go through formal processes that get bogged down in turf protection and requirements and all those sorts of things, I think we'll find that even in state universities or other kinds of places, there's a hunger to really experiment and try new stuff.
Terrific.
One comment I make is 2 things. One is, look for permission. Don't make it any harder than you have to, and work to minimize the opportunity for misperception. There are a lot of false negatives out there, and just rather than win the argument, just skip the argument as best you possibly can. So, and again, design your life, and then literally on not week 1, but week 2, I think it is, we do these values integration exercises. We do not call them that. And we've gotten a lot of mileage out of the field of positive psychology, not just what's wrong with people who are pathologically sick, but what's right with people who are healthy and thriving. And that's not contested. Now, frankly, you can argue that about half of what positive psychology has discovered, any wisdom tradition has known for a long time. But just because Buddha thought it was cool doesn't mean that it matters. But if Martin Seligman thinks it's cool, I'm in. So when it turns out, and there's a whole field of study on the meaning in life, not meaning of life. So Michael Steger at Colorado State and a couple of guys have studied meaningfulness. And so impact, making a difference, is my life meaningful to me or not? It is not at all difficult to get institutions, much less individuals, to say, do you want to live a meaningful life? Yes. Who would decide if you are or not? That would be you. Yeah, okay, fine. So, and studies show that if you can articulate how your highest level values, your worldview, your whatever your matters of ultimate concern, correlate your telos, correlates to your actual behavior, then your chance of experiencing meaning making goes up. We're not saying you need to be an ethical person. We're just saying the people who can think that way have a better chance of being meaningful. If you want to go be meaningful, let's try that. And they kind of go, okay. Just boom. So it's, and that's my last comment will be, don't discount instrumentality. Without naming names, I was in a long meeting with a bunch of senior administrators at Stanford talking about where we're trying to take undergraduate education, and a good number of people, rightly so, are wanting to nurture the more reflective student. We want more opportunities for reflection. We want to become a reflective people because that's on the way to this more holistic reality, which I'm totally in alignment with. But there's a difference, and they don't like instrumentality, like in order to, some people want students to simply recognize that being reflective is a good thing, and they should grow into reflectivity. And I'm a little unpicky about process mechanisms, and I'm kind of, well, if I can find a reason that you would be reflective, and because, I'm happier, or, I could lose weight, or there's something I already know I want, that's more painkiller than vitamin, and reflection's the way to get there, and I don't have an attitude against reflection, okay, fine, I'm in, And then after a while, kind of like, gee, after I'm reflecting more in the last year, I've noticed that's really kind of important, isn't it, Dave? Well, yeah, maybe you ought to stick with that, Chris. And so I think there are a lot of good things that aren't happening in people's lives that deserve to be valued for their own sake. It is a harder sell than finding an easy thing that they want, that's a stepping stone to. So we're big fans of legitimate instrumentality that makes the world a better place.
If I could just make one other note, and that is that I've found that in varieties of settings, inside and outside the academy and other organizations, Simon Sinek's TED Talk, Start With Why, opens up conversations because he manages in 17 minutes not only to talk about the brain and how it functions, but weaves together stories of the Wright brothers, Martin Luther King, and Steve Jobs. and there'll be different people for whom each of those stories resonate.
Animates, yeah.
They can catch it with Steve Jobs and MP3 players and iPods, or Martin Luther King and the speech on the Mall in Washington in 1963, or the Wright brothers and how two guys who weren't as funded as the guy at the Smithsonian nonetheless were the ones who had the breakthrough innovation. It opens up space where different people with different questions can find a hook into the kind of why, not just the how and the what.
Right.
And I think to add to that point, as you're thinking about integrating this in, say, higher education, there could be a lot of different viewpoints, perspectives on this. And so when you have some sort of utilitarian or, factors involved that go along in your trajectory or support your argument, don't discount them.
Yeah.
You want to utilize them. You don't want that to be the justification at the end of the day why,
Right.
why you engage this. But you want to utilize it and harness it because that helps build momentum, buy-in, and potential to implement things where you can get into the broader issues about developing a student for the good of developing that student.
A brief comment about design thinking really is not the same as research. Bill, my partner, was leading a faculty college conversation because, again, we're so experienced in doing this experiential education stuff, which is now really hot, 30 years later, and doing some seminars for other faculty on how they can do these kinds of things. And Bill's describing, empathy first, deep dive on the situation analysis, then form your point of view, define the question you're working on, and one of the profs raises his hand and goes, "Wait a minute. So you form your hypothesis after you do the research?" And he goes, "Right." And he goes, "That's cheating. That'll work every time." We go, "Right." Design is organized cheating. But it's not top down. And so literally, in fact, the guy that did that second PhD research project under Bill Damon, a guy named Tim Riley now at Notre Dame, wonderful guy, came to us and was working with me on the grad program. And the first thing he said was, "Dave, I'd really like to review," because he was in the School of Education, the material from a pedagogical point of view and give you some. And I said, "Oh, so Tim, what you're really saying is we just made this stuff up and we're not educators. You're going to make sure that we're not doing it all wrong." And he kind of goes, "Yeah." So I said, "Great." So I gave him all the curriculum. And he went away. And by the way, because as bottom-uppers in design, you do this bottom-up thing, and then you get this thing that works well enough, and then you go with it. Is it right? You don't actually, there actually might be a way better way to teach the class that I teach that I don't know about, because that's just the one we built. It works well enough, right? And we're sticking with that. And I actually was really thrilled because I thought, well, Tim's going to come back top down from educational theory and pedagogy and epistemology, and he's going to tell us all the stuff that's wrong, and then we can fix it. And he didn't come back for 3 months, and he said he'd come back in 6 weeks. I go, "Tim, where is the result? Did you do the report? Did you do the study?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Did you do the report?" He goes, "No." I go, "Why?" He goes, "Well," I kind of go, "It's fine, huh?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's fine." There's nothing interesting to write. He goes, "You're fine." But that was a serendipity. There's nothing about design that will necessarily land on the same research outcome. And I think that's what gets in some people. The task force won't just slow you down. The task force is looking for a critical mass of rigorously demonstrable right answerness. And design doesn't always have that answer. You have to give that up a little bit.
This has been terrific. Let me just mention one thing which will reveal a bias that I've had from working here at Olin for a while. We're really proud of the fact that when our kids graduate, they do well in the next level of their career. Many of them go to work, but a lot of them go on to graduate school. And it turns out that in engineering, one of the gold stars on your record is to win one of these nationally competitive graduate research fellowships from the National Science Foundation. There are only 1,000 of them given the year for not just engineering, but all of the natural sciences. Olin students do well in that. So that just sort of biases what you think about the pathway to making a positive impact on the world towards fundamental research. There's nothing wrong with fundamental research. It's done a great thing for the country. But imagine what the world would be like if there were national graduate design fellowships for people who thought differently, not looking agnostically back at a set of data to see if you can develop some criteria that lasts, but rather they think proactively about what could be built in the world that doesn't exist now, and changing 1,000 variables at once to create something totally new.
If I could just make one note on that, to your point, because I think part of what both you're doing here at Olin in our first conversations that really appealed to me, and also what Dave's doing with Designing Your Life, one of the fundamental problems with education, and it's particularly bad at higher education levels, but we've infused it through K-12, is that we're raising critics, not performers. And so what we teach is, even in English, you don't learn how to write poetry and how to write novels, you learn how to be a critic of them. And it's a kind of passive critic kind of approach that's a deep mindset. It infuses a kind of skepticism, if not cynicism. And part of what you're doing at Olin, and I think what the Designing Your Life principle, what the focus on character, as that becomes more important in education, is to focus on, we're not just going to sit back and be cynics. We actually have to do things, and that does mean you're going to risk failure and learning how to succeed better, and you're going to learn from those mistakes. But that kind of design principle is really crucial, because often the research mindset is actually narrowing you into, at best, a groove, more likely a rut, rather than helping address the kinds of questions and challenges that we need for the 21st century. We need new and renewed kinds of institutions, and that's only going to happen from the design mindset rather than the old-fashioned research critic mindset.
Yeah. Amen. Yes, Chris?
To add and build upon that, I mean, one of the interesting things on the research in this area is the degree to which, when someone finds their purpose, it tends to be something that they think that they can have impact on. Right? So and this gets into design thinking and the idea of prototyping and the ideas that you can build and create something, right? So, very few young adults now think of themselves as wanting to pursue a life in politics. And so the reason is because they can't really, it is what it is, it can't really make an impact there, right? But there's other spaces where I think, where can I make an impact? Where can I do things? And that ends up shaping the debate for where they end up going. Now, whether that goes in the dysfunctional belief direction or in something non-dysfunctional, is set to come. But the issue is more thinking about what's attainable. And what design thinking brings is that sense of that I can attain, that I can accomplish, that we can create. That's not an impossible task, but something that through a process we can think through and do. And that can help be very productive for shaping a sense of purpose.
Well, this has been a great time this morning, at least for me. I've learned a great deal. And I'll just end this with the comment that I had from my mentor, Mel Ramey, who those of on the Olin campus know passed away last summer. And he basically showed with his career and his life that hopeful faculty members spread hope among their students, and cynical faculty members spread cynicism. And in order to make a dent in this, we need to change the mindset of faculty members so that they inspire the designers who will create a better world. And as I leave, we have a tradition at Olin that people in the audience have homework. This is a school, after all. I would love to hear from each of you about your reflections on what you've heard here today, about this whole business of sense of purpose and what does it mean in an undergraduate education. I would love to receive your letters and also your comments on the reading that I distributed, in particular the paper by Howard Gardner about what we're not teaching our kids today and how this is resulting possibly in an unraveling of civic discourse in the country. Thank you very much, and let's head to lunch. Thank you, panel.